Hello, welcome back to Sky News Sunrise. Plenty to talk about this morning. We'd love you to get involved at Sky News, #Sunrise. The big news you're waking up to is, of course, that the EU have agreed a Brextension until the 31st of October. And if that date rings a bell, it should do, because it is Halloween. Joining me now, Sonia Sodha from The Observer and Katy Balls from The Spectator. Too late for the newspapers to react. This decision coming in the early hours of the morning. So we're looking at online for reaction to that announcement. Let's first of all start by talking about your reaction to that news. 31st of October, Halloween. Sonia, what do you think about that?
Well, it wasn't the 9-month or 12-month extension that was being touted. So we know that certain leaders in the EU, particularly Angela Merkel, were in favour of a longer extension because they fear that by giving us, say, 6 months, Britain would just be kind of knocking at the door again in 6 months' time, asking for another extension. But I think what's interesting about this decision is it reflects that for the first time we're starting to see some divisions open up within the EU 27. So what's been quite remarkable so far is how unified the EU 27 have been, while there's been so much division and conflict here at home in the UK and in Westminster. But really last night what we saw was Macron starting to put his foot down, and it was really him who insisted on the extension being 6 months, not 12 months or 9 months. And he seems to have sort of won out there.
And Katie, it was interesting, Donald Tusk in his statement after that decision was made said, please don't waste this time. Then Theresa May came out to give her version of events, and she still sounded confident that she can get the deal done by June.
Yeah, I mean, I think she needs to sound confident whether or not she is actually confident, because if you look at that period of time that this extension has been granted, it's slightly less than some had expected, but it's still ample time to have lots of events such as a general election or
a referendum
or a Tory leadership contest. And I think that Theresa May needs to show to her party, or at least try and convince them, that she is close to passing a deal if she is to stay in place. She is technically immune from challenge, but there are lots of MPs and even ministers who think, if we have breathing space, if we can't do anything on Brexit for 6 months, why don't we try and change the leader?
Well, it's only 10 to 7 in the morning, so MPs in the UK are just waking up to this news. I'm sure they'll be reacting online within the next few minutes. We'll keep you across that. But it was good timing for the United States. Donald Trump tweeted, he put, too bad that the European Union is being so tough on the UK and Brexit. The EU is likewise a brutal trading partner with the US, which will change. Sometimes in life, you have to let people breathe before it all comes back to bite you. And Sonia, a lot of viewers reacting on Twitter to me this morning are saying, oh, this is more time wasted. We should have been out tomorrow, and then we could have started negotiating all these trading partnerships. We're wasting time.
You can sort of see where people are coming from, and I think, you know, people, including Donald Tusk, including lots of people in the UK, what they'll be worried about is, what does a 6-month extension solve, really? It's really hard to see the parliamentary arithmetic around this changing. It's very hard to see how Theresa May gets her deal through. If the last few weeks have taught us anything, it's at a really sharp cliff edge. The threat of no deal isn't enough to bring MPs in Parliament round her deal. So it's quite hard to see what changes in order to allow Theresa May to get her deal through. And really it feels like we need something more significant to break this gridlock. That could be a general election, though it's hard to see Tory MPs themselves voting for a general election right now. It might be a referendum.
Katie, let's have a look at Emmanuel Macron's tweets. The French president, he's put, it's now up to the British to be clear with themselves and with their people. In the background, domestically, the government is still having these talks with Labour. What does this Brextension until the 31st of October mean for those talks? It doesn't really give it a sense of urgency, does it?
No, and I do think that even if you just look at these talks for the past week or so, there hasn't really been this sense of urgency. They wrap up on time. There's no late night meetings. You get a statement from Number 10 every day saying, you know, progressing, and yet you don't hear much more. I think what's tricky is neither side, Jeremy Corbyn's or Theresa May, wants to be the first to walk out of the talks. There is a chance that now Theresa May has an extension, she'll make her move. She'll pivot to what Labour want, which is a customs union. But I think that's so tricky for her party. It might just be that we keep going through this charade rather than get anywhere.
Let's have a look at some of the European press reaction to that decision that happened in the early hours of the morning. Der Spiegel online, the German newspaper, they've come up with a new word for what's happened. You'll have to forgive my pronunciation, our German viewers. Verlangerlangeren, which I think, using on online translation, means something like extension to the extension to the extension. Sonia, it's interesting, Europe looking at this, what are they making of it all?
Well, I think there's a sense of kind of déjà vu, isn't there, really? And certainly frustration. And I think that frustration is reflected in Macron's tweet that we just looked at as well. So they really feel like Britain hasn't used the time since triggering Article 50 to sell a workable solution to MPs, to British people. And so I think there's just a lot of frustration in Europe. And that's what we're seeing with, Macron putting his foot down and saying, no, you can only have a 6-month extension. And I think, Donald Tusk's entreaty, don't waste this time. I think there's probably some scepticism that we're going to see the developments here in the UK that will sort of find a way out of this gridlock, really.
Yeah, and there is a bit of lightheartedness around online this morning, what with the date being set as the 31st of October, of course, Halloween. For me, Tony Strange, who's watching from home this morning, has won it so far with his Halloween pun. The question is, come the 31st of October, will it be trick or treaty? Get your Halloween puns in at Sky News, hashtag Sunrise, at Sky Sarah Jane as well. And this has come in from Philip Cowley. He's Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London. He's put, this is going to be like when I tell the kids that they can watch just one more episode of Paw Patrol, but then they absolutely have to go for a bath. And they promise, absolutely promise, to do so. I mean, Katy, that actually is quite a good summary of what's going on here. The EU have agreed to an extension. A lot of people are going to go, well, what happens when we get to the 31st of October? Will we be asking for another one?
Yeah, and I think when you get to the 31st of October, is that the point that if we haven't got an alternative plan, say Theresa May is somehow still in place and we're still talking to Labour from the government view, is that the point that they say, well, no, you're going to no deal? Because EU leaders, and I think that was one of the things that came up last night, don't want to look responsible for a no-deal Brexit. But I do think this space does give time for reflection on the UK side. And I think that if there is...
Reflection, but that's what they've been doing for the last 2 years. I mean, people are saying, how much time does the UK need? It could be up until Halloween, it could be the next couple of years. We keep using this phrase, we are where we are. It's Theresa May's deal that's there, and nobody seems to be able to get behind another way forward.
And
how is this more time going to help?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the problem. The idea of no deal on the 31st of October, that still exists. And I think the problem for Theresa May is it's really hard for her to get the really hard Eurosceptic flank of her party to swing behind her deal while there is a prospect of a no deal on the table. And so I can't see certain MPs like John Redwood, for example, swinging behind this while that prospect exists.
But I do think that's why you might see this movement for a change of leader if she cannot provide anything.
Okay, Sonia, Katy, thank you for the moment. Sonia and Katy will return at 7:45 as UK MPs wake up to this news. We're waiting for the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, to tweet. He did tweet previously saying that if there's an extension, he'll make it as difficult as possible. What's he going to say this morning? Thank you. They'll be back later. Right now, though, welcome back to Sky News. You're watching Sunrise. Plenty to talk about with regard to Brexit this morning. At Sky News, hashtag Sunrise for your views, because that's the news you're waking up to. That Brextension is now going to be until the 31st of October, otherwise known as All Hallows Eve or Halloween. Joining me to take a look at the stories and reaction online to that news in the early hours of the morning, former Labour advisor Sonia Sodha and deputy political editor at The Spectator, Katy Balls. Welcome back both. Let's just start by taking a look at some of the reaction online. MPs and political figures waking up to the news this morning. Nicola Sturgeon, one of the first people to tweet, it's a relief that thanks to the patience of the EU, we will not be crashing out tomorrow. But the UK must not waste time. Allowing people to decide if they still want to leave is now imperative, and Scotland's interests must be protected. Sonia, that is the one certainty. There's not going to be a no-deal default tomorrow. But now this time, up until the 31st of October, so many options back on the table, and one of those is a people's vote.
That's right, and it's really hard to see what changes in politics in the next 6 months to get some sort of deal through. And I think that's why why actually, Nicola Sturgeon's always been a strong supporter of a confirmatory referendum on any Brexit deal. That's because there's a strong principled case for one. There's a firm leave proposition on the table now. It's right that people get to ratify or reject it. But I think more MPs in the coming weeks may come round to back the idea of a confirmatory referendum just for pragmatic reasons, because unless the arithmetic in Parliament changes, and it's quite hard to see how we get to a general election before the summer, it's hard to see Tory MPs voting to potentially lose their own seats. And unless we have a general election, we're in stasis, and it's very hard to see what changes. And so some MPs will look at a referendum and think, well, perhaps this is the only way out of the gridlock.
Well, Katy, using a Halloween reference, it breathes life into things like, a confirmatory referendum, a Tory leadership contest, a general election. All of those will now be talked about again. Let's have a look at David Lammy's tweet this morning. David Lammy MP, he says, kicking the can down the road until the 31st of October buys time, but it doesn't solve the Brexit crisis on its own. It's vital we now go back to the country and ask the public for direction on what to do now. Hashtag put it to the people. Emmanuel Macron also said yesterday, the French president, this should be a chance for the UK to focus their minds on what they want. More time, but do you think there'll be more decisions made?
Well, it also takes the pressure off slightly in a sense. I think Theresa May does need to look like she is very busy talking to Labour. She's said that she still thinks that she might be able to pass her deal in time for the UK to actually leave before the EU elections, because...
So she thinks it can be done before June still?
Yeah, well, she says she can. I think she does need to give that impression. I think you've quickly seen all the second referendum campaigners try and say that this means that you can get there. I think that if you look at the numbers in Parliament, we are still far away from reaching that. I don't think you are quite there yet. And there is a chance that if Theresa May can't reach a breakthrough with Labour, she will hold a series of indicative votes that this time are binding on options, and one might be a second referendum. But in terms of the Conservative Party, I think a second referendum is even less popular than a permanent customs union. So I think it's hard to see her going there. But we could end up with a different leader. We could now have that leadership contest. But if you replace Theresa May with a different Conservative MP, I doubt they're going to be a people's vote advocate. If anything, they're going to go for a harder Brexit.
It's interesting, Steve Hawkes, who's at The Sun, politics there, he's said a gentle reminder of what Theresa May said on March the 20th as Prime Minister. I'm not prepared to delay Brexit any further than the 30th of June. I mean, Sonia, yet again today, all these past quotes from the Prime Minister are going to come back to haunt her.
Yeah, and she said a lot of things in the past, hasn't she, that she's ended up U-turning on. She did say she wasn't going to hold a general election in 2017, and lo and behold, there was a general election. So I think the impossibility of the situation is basically what sort of forced her hand. She had to accept the long extension from the EU. There was nothing else for her to do. And I suspect, even though there are lots of MPs in her party who really don't want her in post, they don't really have any formal mechanisms to remove her at the moment, because they can't challenge her for 12 months from the last time that they challenged her. So I suspect we could still see Theresa May being a Conservative Prime Minister going into the conference season this autumn.
And Katy, there was a sort of hint in Donald Tusk's speech after this decision was made yesterday about the possibility of the UK actually changing its mind and staying within Europe. This is the headline in the German newspaper Zeit Online. The translation of this headline, I'm reliably informed, is damned to stay. Do you think that's the viewpoint from Europe, that actually if you give the UK more time, we might end up actually staying in the EU? I'm just watching my Twitter feed go mad. But that's a suggestion from Europe. It might be an option.
It's definitely a view amongst some EU leaders. I mean, Donald Tusk has been quite frank in the past that the happiest solution in his mind is that the UK decides to change its mind, that you revoke Article 50. I actually think he had a strange situation last night when Emmanuel Macron appeared to help the Brexiteers slightly. He's someone who's very critical of Brexit, but he was a voice in the room that was pushing for a shorter extension. And that's because he thinks that in a way, the UK starts to be seen as a troubled child. I think there's some in the EU who actually don't really like the idea of us staying with all our problems. And I think the shorter extension means that it's more likely the UK will come to a decision. Longer extension does help things like the second referendum campaign.
It's interesting. We're all looking forward to Halloween this morning, but Tamara Cohen, our political correspondent, reminded us that Easter is actually upon us. MPs breaking for Easter tonight. had a tweet in from one of our viewers, Eric Hobson. He says, I hope MPs cancel their summer holidays as 6 months can suddenly become 3 months. Is there any likelihood that MPs will start cancelling holidays to make headway?
I think it's very unlikely. I think what's going to happen is that you will either see a big move around something before the summer, for example, like a referendum. There's a chance that we might see MPs rally around that. Maybe Theresa May offers a compromise on it. If we don't get there before the summer, I suspect what's going to happen is that the stasis will continue, MPs will go away for their summer breaks. I can actually see us getting to a point, and I think this is why Donald Tusk was like, use this time productively. You can see ourselves getting to a point where it's the 1st of October, and it's like, oh, whoops, we've got, 4 weeks
Well,
left.
that is the thing, the government continuing to talk to Labour, Katy, and, nothing's going to focus their minds like more time. The urgency's gone.
Yeah, and also I think the point about recess that's been made, if MPs cancel their summer holidays and have more Brexit debates in the chamber, I don't think it's going to lead anywhere. We've been having Brexit debates for over 2 years, and people just say what they think and don't really want to change their position or compromise. I do think what might change, however, is if Theresa May can't pass her deal and we have this breathing space, or, lots of people don't see it as a positive, but you have that space, the Tory party might try and push Theresa May out and get a new leader, and that could change the dynamic.
OK, well, we'll be discussing that possibility after 8 o'clock this morning. Katy Balls, Sonia Sodha, thank you for your company and your thoughts this morning. As reaction continues to that decision made in the early hours of this morning that that Brextension is extended to the 31st of October, Halloween.